Hello, Crossing Church. How are you doing? You doing all right? It's good to see you. It's awesome to be in the house of the Lord with the people of the Lord, and that's in all these different locations. I want to welcome all of our campuses that are joining with us, everyone in Macomb this Saturday evening. Thank you for joining, being part. Kirksville, 929, Pittsfield and Hannibal, Lima and Mount Sterling, and Keokuk. All of us together, worshiping the Lord together. At the same time, just excited about what God is doing. And you know, He is doing great things. Last year, we started talking about how there was this outpouring. It's like God was doing this stuff, incredible stuff. And we saw it in baptisms. We saw it in attendance. You know, last week we had the highest non-Easter attendance we've ever had. But you know, what's really cool is I asked just for the numbers of baptisms. And this weekend, we're going to go over 200 since January. And here's what's cool about that is this time last year, we had 130. And so it's telling you that the revival's not over. God's still just pouring it out. He's still doing it. He's doing incredible things. And I want you to know, it's not a number. That's not about a number. It's about God working specific miracles in people's lives and in their families and in their marriages and in their extended relationships. And to me, that is just, it's so amazing. Every time a person makes a decision like that, it's just an incredible victory. And we just need to recognize that. You know, last week, we were talking about Jesus in his prequel and in his first year of ministry. And in that first year, there are 7 recorded miracles. We talked about those last week. These are what they are. They're the miracle of turning water into wine. You remember that. The healing of the nobleman's son, the miraculous catch of fish, the demon-possessed man that Jesus healed on the Sabbath in the synagogue in Capernaum, and then going across the street healing Peter's mother-in-law after that. A leper, while they were doing a preaching tour, was healed, and then the paralytic that was let down through the roof back in Capernaum. Those 7 miracles recorded in his first year. What I want to talk about with you this evening is the miracles recorded in the second year, because Jesus is a miracle worker. And he was a miracle worker, and he is a miracle worker. And what we're going to do is spend time just in the second year and talk about the miracles that happen. These miracles demonstrate 3 things, just 3 things about Jesus. And I want you to, if you're taking notes, you might want to write these things down. It says, this is what they remind us of, that Jesus had power over the human world. So Jesus working miracles, when he heals people or when he raises the dead, he's showing you that he has power over the human world, whether that means life and death, whether that means sickness, whether that means disease, or whether that means a challenge or a handicap. Jesus has absolute power over the human world. The second thing that we see in his miracles is this, that Jesus has power over the spiritual world. He has power over the spiritual world. And we'll see how he does that over the demonic world, you know, the unseen world that was around him, it's around us. Today he has power over that. And the third is that Jesus has power over the natural world. That means like all of the rules of nature, that Jesus supersedes all the rules of nature, of matter, of energy. And we see that in his second year. Now I'm going to just list the 16 miracles that happen in the second year. Now there's 16 recorded in the second year. Some of those are mass miracles. All right, and we'll talk about that. But there's 16, and I want to say them in order, and then we're going to drill down. Are you okay with me here? You doing all right? Good. Okay, the first one is the healing of a man who has paralysis at the pool of Bethesda, and that's in Jerusalem. The second one, he heals a man on a Sabbath day who has a withered hand. The third one is a mass healing. It's people just came to him from everywhere, and he healed everybody. Fourth one is a centurion's servant. that he heals who's sick. The fifth one is a dead boy on the way to be buried at the cemetery, and he raises him to life and gives him back to his mother. The sixth one is a blind and a person who, because of a demonic interference in his life, is both blind and unable to speak. The seventh is when Jesus speaks to the storm and calms the storm. The eighth one is the Gadarene demoniac. They actually go across, and this is the guy who said, "My name is Legion, for we are many." That's that story. The ninth one is the daughter of Jairus who dies, and Jesus raises the little girl back to life. 10th one is the bleeding woman, the woman that's in the road, that's in the street, and touches the hem of his garment. The 11th one is two blind men that are trying to find Jesus so that they can be healed, and he heals them. The 12th one is another one who has a demon possession problem, makes him unable to speak. The 13th is another mass healing where he just heals everybody. The 14th is just another mass healing where he heals everybody. 15th is where Jesus feeds 5,000 men from 5 loaves and 2 fish. And the 16th is when he walks on the water. All right, those are the 16 miracles that I'm going to be calling attention to while we spend this time together. Now, I told you that they all boil down into 3 basic categories. The first one is Jesus' power over the human world. 10 of these 16 miracles in his second year are miracles of healing. They're miracles where someone comes to Jesus with an infirmity, or they are in fact dead. Somebody approaches Jesus, or Jesus approaches someone, and that person's dead. And like he completely reverses the irreversible. One thing I want us to understand about Jesus is that even though Jesus has lots of different reasons for doing what he does, when he's doing these miracles, these incredible feats, when he heals, primarily what's motivating him is compassion. It's compassion. I know that there's many times he makes a point, and there's times when he asks certain things of people, but usually the reason that he's pushing into a situation and he's healing is because he has compassion. And I just love that about Jesus, that the reason he heals us, even though he knows that the people that he heals physically, someday they're going to die. You know, all the eyes that he opens and the ears that he opens and the mouths that he opens and the legs that he helps and the hands and all of that, eventually they're not going to be usable anymore because we're mortal. But still, when he sees us, and he looks at the condition of our life. One thing I know about Jesus is that when I'm praying to him, when you're praying to him, he has compassion. He loves you. He cares about you. His heart breaks for you. Even in the physical situations of life. I think we need to understand that. And it's perfectly illustrated in the first miracle, the man at the pool of Bethesda. Now, Jesus, remember, each year of Jesus' ministry is marked by Passovers. So he's down in Jerusalem, and he's in Jerusalem because of Passover. He finds himself alone. He's not with his disciples, and he goes to a place called the Sheep Gate that goes into Jerusalem, into the temple area. It's important to know about what the Sheep Gate is. This is the gate, believe it or not, where they brought in the sheep. Okay? Well, how many sheep did they need when they did all this sacrificing in Jerusalem? Well, they would just need lots and lots of sheep. And those sheep, you know, sheep aren't exactly a clean animal. And in order to take them into the temple area, they had to wash the sheep. And they would wash them in a pool known as the Pool of Bethesda. And it was also the place where people who were chronically sick would go. There was a legend that an angel would come down and stir up the water, and the first person that would get in the water would be healed of whatever infirmity they had. And so all these people that had no other hope in life would stay there by this pool because of this legend to try to get in the water and be the first person in the water so that they might be healed. And there's a man there. Now, think about this. What kind of water is in a pool where they clean sheep to go into the temple? What kind of water is that? This is nasty, gross water. You know what it is? This is a place where they would take sick people because they didn't want them around the healthy people. It was a place nobody went to. Nobody would want it. It would stink in there. And the water would be rancid in there. It would be a horrible place. And you know what? That's where we find Jesus when he's alone. When he doesn't have his disciples around him. Of all the places you'd find him, you find him there. What does that tell you about Jesus? He has compassion. He loves those people. The people that everybody else isn't even thinking about, doesn't even care about anymore. He loves them. And he's there. And he begins to talk to this man who's on a pallet, who can't get in. And he said, oh, I always want to be the first one in, but I can't get in. Someone always gets in before me. I've never been healed. Been there for years. And you know what Jesus does? Heals him. Do you know what Jesus asks of him? Nothing. Doesn't even know who Jesus is. Has no idea. Just heals him. As a matter of fact, there are people that question the man who's healed. And he goes, I don't know. I don't know who it was that healed me. All I know is that I'm healed. Tells you something about Jesus, doesn't it? And about his compassion. You go on a little further in the story to Matthew chapter 9. And you know, over and over, and I told you there are 3 of these in these 16, where they're just mass healings, where Jesus is just in a crowd of people. They're bringing everybody that's sick to him, and he's healing them all. I mean, he doesn't like pick and choose. He just heals everybody. Everybody that has a sickness. Do you think that some people are going to use their healing to do things that are contrary to the will of God? What do you think? And still, he heals them all. So you get a little snapshot of what it was like to be Jesus in Matthew chapter 9. He's arguing with the Pharisees, and while he's arguing with them, in verse 18, this is what happens. Let's read it together. It's Matthew 9:18. While he was saying this, a ruler came and knelt before him and said, my daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live. Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. In verse 22, it says, Jesus turned and saw her. Take heart, daughter, he said, your faith has healed you. And the woman was healed from that moment. Pretty amazing. Keep going. When Jesus entered the ruler's house, he saw the flute players and the noisy crowd. He said, go away, this girl's not dead but asleep. But they laughed at him. And after the crowd had been put aside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. And news of this spread all over the region. Now, Matthew 9 is kind of a Cliff Notes version of this story. The man's name was Jairus. He was a synagogue ruler. It was his daughter. She wasn't dead yet. She was only sick. He came to Jesus and said, if you'll just come to my house and minister to my daughter and heal my daughter, then she'll live. She's my only daughter. The Bible teaches us that he'd spent all of his money, all of his influence, everything he had. A deeply spiritual man, but this guy couldn't pray his way into getting her healed. He was out of options. He goes to Jesus, which would have been a humbling thing because the people that ran the synagogue didn't like Jesus. He goes to him and he begs him. The Bible says he gets down on his knees and he begs him. He grovels. And while he's doing that, someone comes and says, don't trouble the man anymore. Your daughter's already dead. And Jesus says, go on, lead the way. And he goes to the house, and they're already assembling for the funeral. Already assembling for the funeral. He makes them all leave. And he's there with this little girl. Her name, it says Talitha Kumi. I say to you, child, arise. He takes her by the hand, and she just wakes up. A girl that was dead. She just wakes up. And then he gives her back to her parents. And then the people see what he's done. Something amazing. Why do you suppose he did that? Well, certainly it showed that he was God, but he had compassion. He had compassion on a man who probably really wasn't in his fan club. On the way to find Jairus' daughter and to raise her from the dead, there's a woman that approaches Jesus in the crowd. We read about it in verses 20 to 22. I read it a second ago. It says, just then a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." And Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed from that moment. This is also a very powerful story. This woman has an issue of female bleeding that will not stop. And she's had it for 17 years. It's made her ceremonially unclean. It means that she can't go in a synagogue. She can't go in the temple. She can't make sacrifices. She is cut off from her people, and she is cut off from God. That's why she's approaching Jesus in a crowd, so Jesus won't see her. Her idea is, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I'll be healed. When you read it in the other Gospels, it turns out that she touches him and slinks back away into the crowd so that no one will know that it was her. And he stops everything. He goes, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" And there she is. "You touched me." And then he calls her a daughter. She does belong. This outcast, she does belong to her people. She's clean again. Do you know that if you touch someone who is ceremonially unclean, you become ceremonially unclean? I find that out. Wasn't that amazing about Jesus and his compassion? That he was willing to be ceremonially unclean so that he could make her clean? And does that relate to you and me with a sin that we carry in our lives? How he becomes unclean so that we can become clean. After that, he goes and raises Jairus' daughter. And then after that, this is all happening while he's just walking down a road. In chapter 9, verses 27 to 31, it says this, "And Jesus went on from there, and two blind men followed him, calling out, 'Have mercy on us, Son of David.' And when he'd gone indoors, the blind men came to him and asked him, 'Do you believe I'm able to do this?' 'Yes, Lord,' they replied. And he touched their eyes and said, 'According to your faith will it be done to you.' And their sight was restored. And Jesus warned them sternly, 'See to it that no one knows about this.' But they went out and spread the news about him all over the region." I think this is a credible story too, because what is it like for two blind men to follow Jesus? How crazy is that? Why wouldn't he just stop? But no, he doesn't stop, and they keep trying to follow. Imagine being a blind guy going, "Would you please stop?" And it says that they finally catch up with him when he's indoors. Can you imagine having to follow Jesus indoors when you're blind? And then he says, "Do you believe that I'm able to do this?" It's interesting, isn't it, that he has an expectation of them. He didn't have any expectation of the man at the pool, but he has an expectation here. And then he heals the two blind men. Compassion. Look at verses 32 and 33. It says, "While they were going out, a man who was demon-possessed and could not talk was brought to Jesus. And when the demon was driven out, the man who had been mute spoke. And the crowd was amazed and said, 'Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel.'" Okay. What do we learn from this? Jesus has power over the human world. He makes deaf people hear, dumb people speak, blind people see, dead people rise again, lame people walk. Jesus has complete power over the human world. And so you and I, we need to understand that Jesus has complete power over our human world. And you probably think, well, if I just pray to Jesus, then he should take this whatever physical problem I have. And then sometimes he doesn't do that. Many times he doesn't do that. And we wonder, well, why? You're a miracle worker. Why don't you work this miracle? Because Jesus, He hears what you want, but he knows what you need. He hears what you want, but he knows what you need. You notice how the requirements, and if you read through those miracles, the requirements that Jesus asks different people, like he keeps walking away from the blind men. Like he asks people, do you believe am I able to do this? He'll say, according to your faith may it be done to you. He'll say different things. And you got the man at the pool of Bethesda, doesn't require anything. You know what? Jesus knows what you need. He knows what you need in order to move from where you are to where you are in relationship with him. Because the ultimate goal is not to be physically healed, because everybody who is physically healed is still going to die. Ultimately, it's about being spiritually made well. And he knows what you need. I wonder what it is that you need. At all of our locations, what is it that you need today? Because Jesus still has power over the human world. Second thing is we learn that Jesus has power over the spiritual world. In powerful stories, whether it's just a guy that is not able to speak, or someone who approaches him that's living in a cemetery that no chains are able to hold, he's been bound, who has a whole legion of demons in him. Jesus doesn't seem to have any problem with the spiritual world. As a matter of fact, when we read these stories in the second year of his ministry, this is what we find out. That demons obey him. Like when he says something, he doesn't speak to the person, he speaks to the entity inside the person, and they obey him. They beg him. With the Gadarene demoniac, the demons begged that they could go into a herd of pigs. They recognize him. Have you ever noticed that? Well, they'll say it. They'll say, what do we have to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? They'll say things. They'll say his name. They'll say who he is in relationship to what we understand as God. And they recognize him. And you know something else that you don't read? You never read in the New Testament when Jesus is casting out demons? They never disrespect him. And I want you to see that in contrast to us, because we disrespect Jesus all the time. Isn't it amazing to think that we are more disrespectful than demons? We use Jesus' name as a swear word and a curse word. Demon would never dare do that. We don't read it. Well, we need him, don't we? We need him so desperately. You know, the spiritual world is a world we don't even understand. We can't see it. We can't battle it. The Bible tells us to put on the whole armor of God that we can resist the devil because he's powerful. And all of the spiritual forces in the spiritual realms that are around us all the time that we can't see. We have to learn how to fight with weapons that are completely different than the weapons of the world. But what we need to understand about Jesus is this, that Jesus defeated an enemy we could never defeat. He did it. And he showed his power over the enemy through his entire ministry, and then ultimately destroyed the power of the enemy so that that enemy has no power over you. The Bible says, greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. Jesus has power over the human world. Jesus has power over the spiritual world. And Jesus has power over the natural world. Oh, there's some great stories about Jesus having power over the natural world. 3 of them that are in his second year of ministry. The first one is where Jesus calms the storm. It's a great story because they're going from one spot in the Sea of Galilee to another spot. They're all in this boat together. These guys are all professional fishermen, seasoned fishermen, which means they know this lake. They understand weather conditions, and they're used to sailing on it. They've done it ever since they were children. This is not something new to them. Jesus is in the back of the boat on a cushion asleep. So what do you do with a guy who's in the back on a cushion in the boat asleep when a big storm comes up? Well, you wake him up to tell him that we're all dying. You think that they would at least like the guy enough to let him sleep through his death. But no. Hey, wake up so that you can die. So that's what they do. They wake Jesus up and they go, oh, I'm sorry about that. I don't know, it's probably my microphone cord. But they wake him up and they say, we're dying. And Jesus kind of looks at him and he says, you guys. And he stands up in the boat and he speaks to the storm. And he says, peace, be still. I love it. It's like what you say to a little kid when he's like acting out. Be still. He says, be still. And the Bible says that when he said that, the waves just stopped and the storm just stopped and the water became as flat as glass. I want to couple that to another story in his second year. It's when Jesus, after he fed the 5,000, came walking on the water. You know that story, right? Because what they're doing is the disciples get back in the boat. Jesus says, I'm going to stay here and pray. And they're trying to get to the other side, but the wind's against them and they can't get there. And there's a storm that comes up, and here comes Jesus walking on the waves in the middle of the storm. And it freaks them out. They see him out there and they go, it's a ghost. And then they look a little closer. He gets a little closer and they go, it's Jesus. It's Jesus? Yeah, it's Jesus walking on the water. I want you to connect those two stories together and then connect them to your life. Jesus has the power to calm the storm. He has power over nature. He also has power to walk in the middle of the storm. Now, Jesus could have just calmed that storm, but he didn't choose to do that. Instead, he chose to walk on the waves in the midst of the storm. You may be in a storm right now. You may be in a situation right now, and you're going, God, calm the storm. And maybe he's saying, you know, I could do that. I'm good at that. But instead of calming it, I just think I'll walk with you in it. Because he's just as good at walking in the storm as he is calming it. And you know, Jesus, even in the midst of that storm, with the wind blowing and the waves high, he's just as calm and in control as he can be. And do you know that there's nothing that happens in your life that surprises him? There's nothing in your life that makes him anxious or worried if he can handle it? Not a problem for him. I wonder if some of us today are praying to God to calm the storm, and God's saying, you know, how about I just walk in it with you? And be assured that it's going to be all right. What if Jesus is saying, how about this? How about you come out and walk on the water with me? How many times have you been well over your head in a situation where you have no answers and you wonder, how am I going to even make it through the next 24 hours? And maybe in that moment, that's what Jesus is saying to you. Come out here and walk on the water with me. And as long as we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, we'll be fine. And when we take our eyes off of him, we may sink. But we don't sink alone because he's right there to pull us back in the boat. You know, Jesus has power over the natural world. And then, of course, there's a story that we're all familiar with where Jesus feeds 5,000. You know, 5,000 men, probably 15 to 20,000 people in all. And you know what it teaches me about Jesus is that he provides. He provides. And he has provided. There are 2 points that you need to get in the feeding of the 5,000. One is that Jesus provides. Second is that he already has provided. You know what Jesus says when it gets toward evening and everybody's hungry and he's been healing and teaching all day long? What do they say? They say they have nothing to eat. And Jesus says what? He says, you give them something to eat. You remember that? He says that to his disciples. He says, you give them something to eat. And they go, what are you talking about? How do we give? All we have are these 5 loaves of bread and these 2 small fish. And what's that among all these people? Do you know what they had just done before that? They had just come back to Jesus, and Jesus had given them the power to heal, and he'd given them the power over the demonic world. They didn't have any power, but he gave them that power. And they came back to Jesus and said, the demons obey us. And we have this power that you've given. This is incredible. I mean, we've been healing all these people. Why do you think Jesus said, you give them something to eat? Because he gave them power to do that. Only they didn't have the faith to believe it. And so then Jesus had to do it for them. And after he blessed it, it was reproduced till there were 12 basketfuls left over when everybody had their fill. Jesus provides. And some of you right now are praying, God, Jesus, please provide for me. And that is not a bad prayer, but I want you to hear this. Sometimes we pray for him to provide when he already has provided. And he's wondering what we're going to do with what he has already provided us. See, it's so much easier for us just to say, keep providing, keep providing. When we need to understand that what Jesus is saying is, you know what I have done? I've already provided. Let's boil it down. What do I learn about Jesus, the miracle worker, in these 3 points? Jesus has power over the human world. He has power over the spiritual world, and he has power over the natural world. How does that relate to you and me? That your greatest healing has already been administered. Your greatest enemy has already been defeated. And your greatest need has already been provided for. He paid for it. He provided it and paid for it in full. And when you come to Jesus, all of those things will happen to you. You will be healed. This spiritual evil world will no longer have power over you because he has that power over you. And your greatest need, the Lord our provider has provided through the cross, his blood, and his resurrection. That is the miracle of salvation. And we're moving to a time of decision.